Welcome to the Chronicles, told by the Chronikle. Cases of the missing, murdered, and unsolved. I'd like to thank everyone for watching today, and don't forget to head over to thecertifiedroracle.com, where you'll find all the source information for today's episode. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss a case. Let's get started with Chronicle number 2, the Jillian D. Cutshall case. The year was 1987. 3 Men and a Baby was the #1 movie, right alongside Madonna starring in Who's That Girl. Guys were rocking the mullet and the girls were wearing short skirts and lace tops. Stop by McDonald's before you head home, as they just partnered with Disney to give you super cool toys in your Happy Meal. Finally at home with your food in hand, run to the TV to watch My Two Dads, DuckTales, or maybe some Fraggle Rock. All the radical things to do in the 80s came to a halt for one family when their little girl vanished on a hot summer day in August. Jillian D. Cutshall was born on February 19, 1978, to Roger and Joyce. They were divorced in 1985, remaining amicable as they had 2 children together. Joyce would move to Grand Bend, Kansas, taking the kids to live with her during the school year, and going to be with Roger, who had remarried a woman named Sheila during the summer and all of the holidays in Norfolk, Nebraska. Jillian was 9 years old in 1987 and went by Jill. She stood 4'6" and weighed 65 pounds. Jill had blonde hair and blue eyes. On the day she vanished, she was wearing a purple shirt, blue jeans, and white Nike sneakers. Jillian was a very bright child and loved to write poetry. At a very early age, she showed signs of being a creative writer. As the summer was coming to an end, Jeff, Jill's older brother, decided to head back to his mom's house in Kansas early. Jill had asked if she could stay a little bit longer. She was having fun with friends and cousins. Her mom agreed to let her, knowing that she had a babysitter for when her dad and Sheila went to work. On August 13th, Roger and Sheila went into their jobs early that morning. We can safely assume they both left around 6 a.m., maybe a little before. Jill did not like to stay alone in the apartment, so after her dad and stepmom left for work, she headed out the 4 blocks to her babysitter's house. Note, I'm not sure if this was something she did on a regular basis during the summertime, or if her sitter would come and pick her up. She made it to the babysitter's house around 6:30 a.m., as one witness states. He saw her sitting on the steps tying her shoe. After this, she seemingly vanished into thin air. Her mom said the sitter kept a key in the mailbox for Jill to get in. Why did Jill not use it that day? Did she ever get the chance to? Or was she even there at all? There are so many questions, and we may never get answers to them. No one would realize that Jill was missing until later in the day, when Sheila went to the babysitter's to pick her up. The sitter told her that she had never showed up that day and assumed she had stayed home with her dad. A little shocked, Sheila thought maybe Jill had stayed home and rushed to the apartment to see if she was there. When she was not, Sheila began to worry and called Roger. He would come home, and they began to drive around and look for Jill, thinking they would find her somewhere. A big note here is, an article states that on the afternoon of the 13th, Joyce received a call from a police officer. He asked her if she knew where Jill was. She thought this odd, and told him no, and asked why. He told her because Jill was missing. Joyce told him she would be in Nebraska the next day. Now I'm wondering if this call came after Sheila and Roger had phoned the police to report her missing, and if the officer perhaps knew Joyce to call her. That's the only way it makes sense, because if the police called Joyce before they reported Jill missing, that would be very peculiar. Roger and Sheila looked for Jill until 6 p.m., when they finally called police to report her missing. Some questioned why they waited so long to call the police. Some also questioned Joyce and why she let her children stay there, knowing they would be alone. To this Joyce said she had no worries, as Roger was looking for a new place to live. She also said that Roger did not leave for work until 9 a.m., so Jill would have already been at the sitters. Joy said she did not know what kind of people lived in the apartment complex, and had she known that there were predators, she never would have allowed them to go. Another big note here is, if Roger did not have to leave for work until 9, why did he leave 3 hours early that day? Did he really leave early? Perhaps. He also could have left and came back home. Perhaps after he left he was returning and saw his daughter on the sitter's step and picked her up to go back home with him. These are all opinions and nothing has been confirmed, but it's pretty compelling when you start to think about it. Police would begin to search for Jill and come up empty-handed. Joyce was not giving up. She would call the station every morning at 10:30 a.m. and ask if there was anything new in the case. Most of the time there wasn't, but one day in November 1988, there was something. The clothing Jill had on the day she vanished was found by hunters. The clothes were found in the Wood Duck Wildlife Refuge between Norfolk and Stanton. No new leads would come in until a year later when Joyce had enrolled in the community college to get a psychology degree. One day a fellow student came up to her and asked if she could interview Joyce. Joyce never turned down an interview as she always wanted to keep her daughter's case alive. This fellow classmate told Joyce she thought her half-brother may have been involved in Jill's disappearance. Her half-brother turned out to be a man who knew Roger and Sheila, as he lived in the McNeely apartments. His name was David Phelps. While investigators do remember David's name from early police reports, he was never questioned because no one could ever locate him. Well, this time a detective did. He walked up to the building David was at and said, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And David said, "Why?" "Because I know Roger and Sheila Cutshall and used to live in the McNeely apartments." The detective could not believe what he was hearing. Did this man really just put himself as not only knowing the victim, but being at the same location as her, possibly implicating himself? David had a few choice words to say to the detective before he headed down to the station with him. This round of questioning would yield nothing of value. It should be noted that by the time detectives were questioning David, they had long ago thought that foul play was involved in Jill's disappearance. However, they had no crime scene, no evidence, and no witness. Therefore, they had no case and no one to prosecute. Detectives also thought in November when they found Jill's clothing they would find a body somewhere near it. When the interview with David yielded nothing, Joyce hired a private investigator. Note: articles state this investigator was a felon who lied to get his license to be a private investigator. He drove David out to the refuge where the clothes were found. Now, to hear David tell this, the PI kidnapped him and forcefully took him to the refuge. While at the refuge, the PI told him to tell him what happened to Jill. David's version of this is the PI took him to a location, pulled a gun on him, told him he was going to tell him what happened to Jill, even if he had to make something up. He then fired the gun in the air. David says at this point he was shaking and scared. He said he truly thought he was going to die out there. He then says because he was afraid, he made up the story of him and Keith Baumgartner. He told the PI that him and Keith had taken her to the woods, where he held down Jill while Keith sexually assaulted her. He said he then became nervous and left them alone, went back to the car and drove home. That was the last he ever saw of Jill, according to him. David did describe in detail Jill's undergarments, and he was correct. Keith was immediately brought in for questioning. He denied all of what David had said. David would recant his statements and say the PI coerced them out of him. Keith was questioned 4 times, and each time he denied any involvement in Jill's disappearance. He also had an alibi for the time in question. Keith has never been charged for any involvement in Jill's case. When David was released, Joyce was very unhappy. So much so, she started a petition to convene the grand jury to open an investigation. Joyce felt there was too much evidence for David not to be charged. The grand jury would indict David for abduction with the intent to commit sexual assault. He was convicted in the spring of 1991 and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Joyce was happy some justice was served, but she still wants to know where her daughter is. David Phelps has maintained his innocence from the beginning. He has tried numerous times to have his case retried, and every time has been denied. In 2007, he asked for the clothes to be retested for DNA and compared to his. This request was also denied. A twist to this case is in 1992, Roger Cutshall was accused and arrested on charges of sexual contact with a minor under the age of 14. This is just 8 years after his daughter had gone missing. Most of the time when the predator gets caught, it's not because it's their first offense. Chances are he had been doing this before. Was Jill one of those victims? The question that sticks out to me is, the ex-wife said he did not have to leave for work until 9 a.m., yet that morning he allegedly left before 6 a.m. Was there talk the night before that he had to go in early? It's possible, but we may never have the answer to that. Roger should have been questioned more in his involvement, if any, in Jillian's disappearance. There were 11.5 hours where Jillian was unaccounted for, before anyone even knew she was gone. The family just wants to know where she is. They do not feel she is alive, but still would like to lay her to rest. If you have any information, please call 1-800-THE-LOST. Once again, that's 1-800-843-5678. I want to thank everyone for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss a case. As always, this is the Chronikle, signing off.